what does Biafra mean?
It means freedom, liberty, fairness, equity, and justice.
Let me tell you a story that most people don't know or have been told to forget. It's about a man, a movement, a country that never healed from a civil war it lost over 50 years ago. Back in 1967, the southeastern part of Nigeria, mostly made up of the Igbo people, tried to break away and form their own country called Biafra. The man who led them was Colonel Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu. The Biafrans felt betrayed and marginalized by the Nigerian government after a series of violent ethnic killing. They said enough is enough and they chose to stand alone. What followed was one of Africa's most devastating wars. It lasted for 3 years. Over 1 million people died. Most of them were children, starving to death. And in 1970, Biafra surrendered. Nigeria said, no victor, no vanquish. But let's be honest, the Igbos lost the war, and they have been paying the price ever since. Decade passed, and another voice rose up. Someone who brought back the dream Ojukwu once had. His name, Nnamdi Kanu, a British Nigerian activist who launched Radio Biafra from London. His message was fiery and unapologetic. He talked about freedom, about dignity, and how the Igbos had been sidelined for far too long. To his followers, Kanu was a hero. To the Nigerian government, he was dangerous. In 2014, he founded IPOB, the indigenous people of Biafra. Their mission was to finish what Ojukwu started. The man in power at that time was General Muhammadu Buhari, who led a battalion against the Igbos during the Biafra War, a former military ruler who had returned as an elected president. Buhari had history. Back in 1984, when he was head of state, his government attempted to kidnap a former minister, Umaru Diko, from London. They drugged him, locked him in a wooden crate labeled diplomatic baggage, and nearly flew him out of London. The British intercepted the crate just in time. The scandal was massive, and the British cut off diplomatic ties with Nigeria. Buhari never forgets that humiliation, and years later, he would try again with Nnamdi Kanu. When Buhari returned to power in 2015, this time as a so-called democratically elected president, he came back with old grudges and new powers. One of his first targets was Nnamdi Kanu. He rearrested him, locked him up, and kept him in detention for over 1 year without trials. But Buhari's obsession with crushing the Southeast didn't start with Nnamdi Kanu. No, it goes all the way back to Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu himself. You see, after the Biafra War ended in 1970, Ojukwu went into exile. Nigeria promised no victor, no vanquish, but the man who led Biafra knew better. He stayed away for years. Then in 1982, under President Shehu Shagare's civilian government, Ojukwu was officially pardoned. It was a symbolic gesture meant to heal the wounds of the civil war, and for a while, it seems like the country was ready to move forward. Ojukwu returned from exile to a warm welcome and even tried to reintegrate into national politics, but that hope didn't last long. In 1983, Buhari overthrew Shagare's government in a military coup, and one of the first things he did was to rearrest Ojukwu, a man who had already paid the price for the Biafran War, a man who had been pardoned, a man who had laid down arms and tried to return to civilian life. Buhari dragged him into detention. No charges, no trial, just punishment, just vengeance. He wasn't interested in reconciliation. He wanted to bring back old grudges, to reopen wound, and the Southeast once again became the target. But karma came quickly. In 1985, Buhari himself was overthrown in another military coup, this time by Ibrahim Babangida. And just like that, the man who had dragged Ojukwu back to prison was out of power. Ojukwu was released and later returned to politics, even running for president in the early 2000s. But history has a strange way of repeating itself. In 2015, after decades in the shadows, Buhari returned, this time wearing the marks of democracy. He was elected as Nigeria's president, promising change and unity, but what followed was the same old script, especially for the Igbo people. Almost immediately, Buhari began a quiet purge, not with guns this time, but with appointments, policy, and power. He systematically shut out the Southeast. In his first major appointments, Army Chief, Navy Chief, Air Force Chief, Police IG, Civil Defense, DSS, not one Igbo person made the list. It wasn't about qualifications, it was about erasing a people from the power structure of the country. Even within the military, no Igbo officer was considered qualified enough to command a major unit under Buhari's rule. Merit didn't matter, royalty didn't matter, your ethnicity did. For the Igbos, it felt all too familiar. The war may have ended in 1970, but under Buhari, the punishment never did. And that brings us back to Nnamdi Kanu, the man who dared to speak up in the middle of all this. In 2017, while Nnamdi Kanu was out on bail, his home in Abia State was stormed by the Nigerian military. Shots were fired, people died, and Kanu vanished. For months, everyone thought he was dead. Then out of nowhere, he appeared in Israel, alive and more defiant than ever. He picked up the mic again, calling Nigeria a zoo, accusing Buhari of being an imposter, and demanding a referendum for Bafra, and then again, he disappeared. In June 2021, Kanu traveled to Kenya. No one knew what happened next until reports started trickling in. Witnesses say he was trapped outside a hotel, blindfolded, beaten, dragged away, no warrant, no arrest, just gone. Days later, the Nigerian government held a press conference. Kanu was back in Nigeria in handcuffs. They had flown him in secrecy, what many now called an illegal rendition. Kenya denied involvement. Britain was furious because remember, Kanu is a British citizen. But the Nigerian government didn't flinch. They got their man. For the Nigerian state, it was about national security. For the Igbo people, it felt like a warning to stay in your place. Since 1970, no Igbo has become president of Nigeria. Not once. Federal projects rarely make it to the southeast. The roads are collapsing. Youth can't find jobs. And IPOB is not just a movement now. For many, it's a symbol of survival and self-respect. Today in 2025, Nnamdi Kanu is still in detention, locked away by the Department of State Service. Nigerian courts have ruled for his release, even the Court of Appeal, but he's still not free. His health is deteriorating. His lawyers are crying out. The new president, Bola Tinubu, has stayed silent. But Kanu's voice, it echoes louder than ever. His followers still chant his name. They wear his image. His kidnapping reopened an old wound. A wound that never truly healed after the Bafra War. It also raised a question Nigeria has been running from for decades. What does justice look like for people who lost a war but never stopped believing in their right to exist?